So I've also started recording on the computer. And I believe we have streaming starting in a moment, right, Jeremiah?
Yeah, give it a minute.
There we are. Shows we're streaming. If you could check Jeremiah, YouTube, and Facebook, just give me the go on that. Welcome, Steve. How are you doing?
Fine. How are you?
Good, good. We're excited to have a speaker like yourself, someone who's already been in the thick of making things happen. And today's topic, of course, a pretty interesting one, a hot topic indeed. White American Baha'is' role in bringing about racial justice and unity. That's a really beautiful topic today. We got some we got our attendees joining in. For those that are joining, I know we have a good speaker on, George Floyd. You have a good voice. We want to suggest that the attendees for the first part of the presentation, we have quotations that need reading. And I'm going to, as attendees join, repeat this, that we would appreciate readers. So volunteers are extremely welcome, such as George Floyd. I know you've got a great voice. That being said, if you are watching this online on YouTube or Facebook, please note we have a website, www.clearwaterbaha'is.org. We've just undergone a web design, a redesign, and it shows we are functional. We're live on both platforms, Facebook and YouTube. Great. Thank you, Jeremiah. So we just want to point out clearwaterbaha'is.org. You can find the Zoom link on the website. You scroll down, there's a Zoom icon, you click on it, it takes you right to this meeting, happens weekly, every Sunday. And again, www.clearwaterbaha'is.org. For those joining on Facebook, we have a YouTube. If you find Clearwater Baha'is on YouTube, it's just that in your search and you'll find us. That is our username. Likewise, on Facebook, we are the Baha'i Center of Clearwater. The page posts a lot of content, not exclusive to our Sunday events. We have multiple events happening on multiple days a week, and they're recorded for everyone to watch. So with that said, Steve, how was your week? How's everything going? How is, more importantly, the initiatives you're working on?
Everything's going well. I mean, it's been a busy week. The Tampa area Baha'is have a lot of activities going on, particularly in the race space ever since the pandemic, and then George Floyd, and it's obviously been the hot topic in our country, which is great. And I see the Baha'is really marshaling all of our resources and coming together and having all sorts of activities to try to bring folks together and discuss these issues. And so for me, I mean, we have I'm in the Tampa Baha'i community, and we started this wonderful race devotional 19 weeks ago, and we've been going 19 weeks now on Friday nights. And it's just a wonderful group of folks from around the country, because we're not hampered by geography right now because of the pandemic. We're all sitting in our homes and having these meetings, and it's been a wonderful group. We have 25 to 35 people every Friday, and we've just had really high-level conversations. And we also formed a task force in Tampa to plan race unity / justice type activities, and we've been having some workshops called elevated conversation workshops. We've had 4 now. The 4th one was yesterday. So that's been really exciting. And
elevated conversations. That is a really interesting subject. I want to hear more about it if you're not already going to talk about it in your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of these elevated conversation workshops is to give people the skills, both in terms of how to have conversations, because oftentimes when we're having difficult conversations with folks about race, it's people who do not necessarily accept the idea that there is racism in our society or want to deny that. And so we need to hear these people. We can't just shove down their throat our ideas because we think we know better. So we have to use certain communication techniques to understand and to hear them. And I think Baha, the master, was very good at that. And we can follow his example. And there's all sorts of studies that have been done on effective communication technique. But we also need information. We also need information to provide people, to show them, both through statistics and then also through anecdotal experiences through our conversations with folks who have been affected by racism, to try to help them get to a level of understanding that maybe we, because of our study and time we put into it, we're already at. So we've covered, both the communication techniques and as well as providing information on certain hot topics. So we discussed poverty and race yesterday. So it's been, but I think the writings talk about how we have to elevate these conversations. And so I think that's an important term. We need to take it out of the contemporary discourse and bring it to a higher level, really a spiritual realm. These are really spiritual. Racism is a spiritual disease, so we really have to get it on that level, as opposed to kind of the political talk, I call it noise, that we hear, every day. We have to try to rise above that and not get brought down to that level, because it really doesn't provide anything but contention. So
agreed.
Yep.
And that is my wife is joining on her phone on Zoom.
Yeah, I heard what I said about 5 seconds later.
Well,
I said it twice without even realizing it.
Yes. And if you want to consider all the screens that are watching this, probably a lot more times now. And we're actually about a good time to give an actual introduction. I feel that it's a good time to do that now. So an introduction as to who the speaker is. Mr. Steve Zaludek, right? Zaludek?
Correct.
Mr. Steve Zaludek is a practicing trial attorney in Tampa, Florida. He was involved in a variety of race unity building activities as a Baha'i youth in Atlanta, sponsored by the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change, and spent a summer during law school interning at the MLK Jr. Federal Holiday Commission. As a lawyer, about half of Steve's clients are people of color, and Steve relishes that opportunity to seek justice on their behalf and to ensure that they are getting the representation and respect that they deserve. Steve has a passion for bringing Black folk and white folk together for needed, meaningful dialogue in order to connect hearts and form genuine friendships. In 2016, he founded a group in Atlanta called Healing the Racial Divide, and he is currently moderating an ongoing Zoom devotional gathering dedicated to race that has occurred every Friday night for the past 4 months. He is also one of the founding members of the Tampa area Baha'is Race Unity Task Force, and in this role has been recently interviewed on radio and TV outlets in the greater Tampa area to talk about the Baha'i-inspired race unity-related activities in the Tampa area. So this week's topic, I discussed it in the very beginning before we spoke, but again, I'll mention for those joining, this week's topic, white American Baha'is' role in bringing about racial justice and unity. And in short summary, this has been a very challenging year for the United States. We have battled a global pandemic, COVID-19, that has taken the lives of almost 200,000 Americans. At the same time, we have come to a point of reckoning as it relates to race relations in our country, ever since the killing of George Floyd. Since Baha'is in America have always been tasked with working towards the elimination of prejudice, and I've been told that unity between Black and white is the most vital and challenging issue. It is an important time for Baha'is to rise to meet this propitious moment, marshal our resources, and do our part to root out the disease of racism and foster racial justice and unity. Steve will discuss his thoughts on the role of white Americans, particularly Baha'is, in fostering racial justice and unity. He will draw on the guidance from the writings of the Baha'i Faith, as well as discuss the current environment and contemporary thought as it relates to the position of whites in American society. he will also draw on his own personal experiences, having learned much during the past 10 years in terms of his own implicit bias, being a white man growing up in America. With that being said, Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. Looks like I'm co-host, so I'm also admitting people, so I'll do that as we go. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jeremiah, who arranged this. I really appreciate and think what you guys do. The Clearwater Baha'i community is great. I've attended one of these before, and very well organized, very well attended, great topics, great presenters. Hopefully I won't let you down today. And I think that I'm really honored to be a part of this. So thank you very much, John. And thank you everybody for attending. I first wanted to say just up front that I am a Baha'i. I'm a member of the Baha'i community. I grew up in a Baha'i family. And obviously this is, this is organized by the Clearwater Baha'is. At the same time, I'm hoping that not everyone on this call are Baha'is. Obviously, everybody on here is interested in the issue of racial unity and justice, or you wouldn't be on this call. And I would just tell you that everything that I'm talking about, even though it'll be very Baha'i-centric in terms of there will be a lot of quotations from Baha'i resources, I think it really applies to all of us. Baha'is are trying very hard to bring about unity. Not on a very large level, but particularly in America, we've been told that unity between black and white is extremely essential if we're going to really survive as Americans, and we'll see some of those quotes coming up. So I think this topic really applies to everyone, and while this specific topic relates to Baha'is' role, I think it's really a role that can easily be played by all white folks in America, not just Baha'i. So I don't want anyone to feel excluded if you are not a Baha'i. And I assume you probably already know a lot about the Baha'i Faith if you're attending. So again, this is open to everyone. I just wanted to make that clear that we're not trying to exclude everyone. We think that this is a topic that we all need to be discussing. So with that said, I've got a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share with you. Let me share my screen here. And I think John has invited everyone to put questions into the chat, and then we can discuss those later after the presentation is completed.
Yes, and as we have quotations on the screen, I want to put up the request again. Please, if you can be a reader, we appreciate it. We have one volunteer, and we would like a few more.
Awesome. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Yes? Okay.
Steve, before you start, can you actually expand it entirely? By
Yeah,
hitting the projection?
if you can tell me how to do that, because I did a presentation yesterday and we couldn't figure out how to get rid of the little part on the left. I would love to get rid of that.
All right, so if you go to the bottom right-hand corner,
yep,
and you see this little hour wine glass looking thing, that's a projection. If you hit that, let's see what
Yeah, see, this didn't work yesterday, so they told me to do the same thing. I clicked it, and it came up, but on my other computer screen. But you guys can't see that, right?
That's fine, because then what you can do, we won't see it, but now go up to your view of your screen there.
Yeah.
And click on it, and then in view, it should give you the ability to swap screens. Do you see it?
Yeah, we did that yesterday. All it does. Oh wait, let's see. Swap. Switch windows?
Switch windows.
Ah.
Yeah.
It's not doing it though.
It's not, huh? All right.
No.
Well, we'll just continue as is. That's fine.
I mean, can everybody see it well? I mean, the only thing is try not to look ahead. It's not a big deal, but I think as I go, you'll only be able, as I scroll down, you'll only be able to see the last one anyway, because the ones that are coming up will be below the bottom of the screen. So I think once we get to 6, then it won't be distracting anymore. So is that okay?
Are you saying that you have the stuff on the left-hand side of your screen that is the Zoom tool settings?
No, the thing on the left just shows the slides that are coming up. It lists the slides. So you're not just seeing the one slide, you're also seeing right now you see 1 through 6, right?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so we'll just hopefully ignore. Yeah, it would be nice, in an ideal world, we would just have the slide that's being talked about, but we couldn't make that work yesterday either. Maybe it's this particular computer. I'm not sure.
Well, what you could do if you go to view, it has slideshow, and you just click on the slideshow button, it should work.
Okay, I'm on view. I don't see slideshow. Show or slideshow at the top?
Slideshow, yeah, right there, yeah.
Okay.
And then from beginning.
Yeah, nothing happened. The problem is I have two computer screens and it's on the other computer screen, but that's not the one you guys can see.
Oh, yeah. Use presenter view. You see that? On the right? To the right.
Presenter view.
To the right.
See, I think we tried all this yesterday and it didn't work. Monique was walking me through this yesterday. She seemed to know what she was talking about, and we couldn't.
I know what the problem is, but I don't know how to fix it. We'll just
it's all right. We'll continue on. Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got it on this computer screen to the right. It's beautiful, but oh well. All right, so we'll get started. So again, topic is white American Baha'is' role in bringing about racial justice and unity. So first, before I really get into the topic itself, I just wanted to present a background. And a lot of this, I'm sure, is information that a lot of you know, but it never hurts us to review it just to make sure, you know, why we're talking about this, why this is so important. So the first thing is, and this is sort of chronological, Abdu'l-Baha, who was, we refer to as the master, he was the son of Baha'u'llah, who was the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith. And he traveled to the United States in 1912 and 1913. And here's a picture when he was in the United States. And what's unique about this picture is, think about this, this was 108 years ago. And he's sitting there with white children and black children together, which was not something that happened a lot in America in the early 1900s. But Abdu'l-Baha, while he was here, he spoke a lot about the importance of the unity between black and white, a tremendous amount. There's a lot of writings, a lot of talks that he gave where he talked about this. He presided over the marriage between a white woman and a black man, which again, you know, that was something that did not happen that long ago. And so he's really the example that Baha'is look to as he really set the foundation for the importance of this issue in America. And here's a quote from Abdu'l-Baha on that exact issue. I'll read this one, it's short. He said, "For the accomplishment of unity between the colored and whites will be an assurance of the world's peace." So again, this was from Abdu'l-Baha's mouth over 100 years ago. And I mean, how could it be said any more directly than that? That if we can't unify, and back then black folks were called colored, and white people, we're not going to be able to have world peace. That's how important this issue is. Okay, so that's what Abdu'l-Baha said over 100 years ago. Now, if we step forward, after Abdu'l-Baha passed on, his grandson, whose name was Shogi Effendi, was tasked with being the individual that the Baha'i community was to look to for guidance. He was given the interpretive rights and interpreting the writings for the Baha'is in the world. And he continued this topic. And amazingly, what I always tell people about Shogi Effendi is he actually never traveled to America, but he wrote extensively to the Baha'is in America on race relations in America. And it's like he had a perfect, he had the pulse of what the issues in America were, despite the fact he had never been here. And it's really incredible. And he wrote this amazing letter to the Baha'is in America in 1938. So that was 82 years ago. And here's one passage from this letter, which I say it's a letter. It was actually a 70-page letter where he basically told the Baha'is in America what their role needed to be. And it was on many topics and on many subjects. He basically diagnosed the illness and then gave us a prescription to solve our issues, which were still as relevant today as ever. And one of the big issues he talked about was racial prejudice. So does somebody want to read that? I'll read it. It's short. So what he said was, "As to racial prejudice, the corrosion of which for well nigh a century has bitten into the fiber and attacked the whole social structure of American society, it should be regarded as constituting the most vital and challenging issue confronting the Baha'i community at the present stage of its evolution. So again, this was in 1938. We have had a lot of guidance, when I say we, the Baha'i community, in the last 25 years from our institutions. And our institutions, the Universal House of Justice is the supreme governing institution of the Baha'is of the world. It's a group of 9 individuals who are elected from all the Baha'is in the world, and they provide us guidance. They have written extensively to Baha'is in the United States about the issue of racial prejudice, racism, as well as our national governing institution called the National Spiritual Assembly. And one thing that runs, a common thread that runs through that guidance has been that they always refer us back to Shoghi Effendi from 1938. So there's no doubt that this is still an incredibly vital and challenging issue, and that it's still something that American Baha'is have to be engaged in, because it's still going to be the assurance of the world's peace. If we're not able to tackle this issue and bring folks together, we're not going to be able to have world peace. So this is still as important today as ever. So now, what else does all this recent guidance tell us? And these are just some things that I have gleaned from having read and studied the guidance, some things that I think might be helpful to the topic that we're discussing today. And I would like to get some readers. So hopefully we have some readers for this. I don't want you guys just to hear my voice for the next 30 minutes. So the first thing that the guidance that I picked out is that the guidance tells us that dealing with racial unity and trying to overcome racial prejudice should be the watchword of all our activities. So does someone want to read that passage?
Regina, could you be a reader for this one?
Here, the Guardian is calling for the Friends to address the question of race unity as a part of life in all of the social spaces in which they are engaged. And similarly, the House of Justice is now saying that freedom from racial prejudice must be the watchword of Baha'is in social spaces in which they are engaged for the activities of the plan. Universal House of Justice, August 6, 2018.
Okay, and then I was curious on what the word watchword means, and so there's a definition, and you'll see a few definitions as we go along today. So it's a word or phrase expressing a group's core aim or belief. So as Baha'is in America, this issue of addressing race unity is supposed to be our core aim. This is our core aim or belief, and everything needs to sort of revolve around that. So moving on. So this is including discourses with wider society. So that first passage was talking about Baha'i activities. This kind of broadens it into not just activities internally within our own Baha'i community, but how we interact with the outside world. So if somebody would like to read that.
I can read it. In the area of discourse, we can explore and develop a conversation with the wider society which, when added to the range of conversations already cultivated by the Institute process, can assist our fellow citizens to abandon the language and practices in society that have resulted in an intractable divide, unite on the basis of commonly held ideas and principles, and work together for a social order free of prejudice and characterized by unity in diversity. The National Spiritual Assembly, 2017.
Thank you. Thank you, David Dean. It's nice when you hear voices that you recognize. So I think this is an important passage because it acknowledges the fact that this is not just some internal thing that Baha'is sit around and kumbaya, we love each other and it's great, but this is really something that's supposed to transform society, and we're supposed to be having these conversations with everyone. But we need to do it in a different language and in a different way than we see. And I don't know how many of you are on social media. I imagine probably a lot of you are, but the language and the practices that are followed by many on social media are not always, usually not, conducive to really bringing about unity. And so we need to have discourse, but we need to have it in a different way. And I think that's a really important distinction. It's very easy to get drawn into the conversations and the way in which these conversations are conducted. And I've been guilty of that, as I'm sure all of us have. And that relates to the next part of this, which is avoid contention. So who would like to read this? Another fantastic passage.
There are many, I can read it. There are many well-meaning people who are striving to improve society by fighting its evils, which usually means contending against individuals, groups, or institutions who are seen as oppressive, unjust, or corrupt. Yet no matter how high-minded a particular cause might be, if it is advanced through contention and confrontation, it merely provokes and intensifies the flame of a counter-movement initiated by others who act on what they consider to be their own high-minded beliefs. Real solutions remain elusive. The cycle of contention continues without end, with one group after the other seizing enough power to implement its views before becoming overcome by those in opposition. One need only to look to the endless mutations of racist oppression over hundreds of years, adapting so as to undermine every social advance in that area. Universal House of Justice, 2018.
Undermine every social advance in that area. This is such a powerful paragraph. And again, I mean, all we need to do is look at the discourse that we see on, in the media, on our social media, perhaps in our own personal conversations with family or friends. And yeah, it just becomes this back and forth battle that's never ending. It's bloody, it's ugly, and it doesn't lead us to where we need to get to. And it's every day, it's constant. So this is a high bar to tell us in this context to avoid contention. But I think it is possible. It is possible. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of patience. We'll continue to talk about that. So in doing all of this, it all must be viewed through the prism of the teachings. Now that's my summary of what I think this passage says. If somebody would like to read this, please. And this is from a letter from just 2 months ago. An amazing letter from the Universal House of Justice. So if somebody could read this, please.
It is not possible for you to effect the transformation envisioned by Baha'u'llah merely by adopting the perspectives, practices, concepts, criticisms, and language of contemporary society. Your approach instead will be distinguished by maintaining a humble posture of learning, weighing alternatives in the light of his teachings, consulting to harmonize differing views and shape collective action, and marching forward with unbreakable unity in serried lines. Universal House of Justice.
Thank you. That was also a familiar voice. So what I think is important in this passage, and again, everything I tell you today is my interpretation. I don't pretend to be some sort of voice of all knowing here at all. Just somebody who's spent a little time, studying this and working on these things. But I think it's important that this passage is telling Baha'is that we cannot transform society just by using the language of contemporary society, which is something I've already referred to, many of these arguments and these debates, and left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, all lives matters versus, Black Lives Matters, blah, 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 riot versus protest. But that we have to learn, we have to be willing to learn, we have to be humble. And so it's not telling us not to learn from contemporary society. It's telling us that is not that's not the only answer. So I think it's important for me as a Baha'i to not just think that I can read the Baha'i writings and that I'm going to be okay, but I do need to study what's out there. There's so many people who have studied racism. They've made it their life's work to study racism, and they've written wonderful books, and there are tons of great studies. And we should read read that information. We should learn that, right? And we should let that be part of our reality. And whatever makes sense, whatever we can take from that makes sense, that fits within the way Baha'is think, and our idea of unity and bringing people together, we should use that stuff, right? But we shouldn't just fall prey to thinking that everything that has been written or everything that's been studied or all the language of society is the be all and end all. So we need to be very careful. So let's not throw it out, because I think it's important that we do all that study. People have spent a lot of time on it, and as Baha'is, we're told to study and to learn and to use science and to use reason. At the same time, let's be careful that we don't allow ourselves to fall into thinking that the answers are simply in that study, because a lot of that, can disunify us. So it's, this is a learning process. It's very difficult, and it kind of feeds into this next slide. We are told, and I'll read this one, that this is not going to be easy. Surprise, surprise. So this is from the Universal House of Justice in that same letter from July of 2020. Thus, whatever the immediate outcome of contemporary events, you need not be deterred, for you are cognizant of the long and thorny road beset with pitfalls described by the guardian that still lies ahead. And this idea of this being a long and thorny road, I will come back to, because I think this is extremely relevant for us white folks in dealing with this issue. Because I think history has shown that white folks have a very short attention span when it comes to race, and a very limited ability to deal with pain when it comes to this race. And we comes with this topic, and we very easily want to run away. I mean, that's what this whole topic of white fragility is about. But we'll come back to that. So we need to have patience. We need to be in for the long haul. This is not going to change overnight, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to be diligent and make sure that we continue to push this issue forward. Ultimately, surprise, surprise, it's a spiritual solution. So would somebody like to read that?
However, the believers should never for one moment lose sight of the fact that the crisis now engulfing every part of the planet is essentially spiritual. If the crisis afflicting humanity is spiritual, can there be any question that its solution must also be spiritual?
Thank you, Regina. Yeah, it seems like a pretty logical question. Sometimes the House of Justice has a very simple way of breaking things down, but it's actually absolutely true. And again, going back to the discourse that we hear in society, the noise that I referred to earlier, it's typically not spiritual, right? And so I think it's our job as Baha'is, or as people of faith, or as people who believe that, there's some higher power that is kind of guiding everything that's going on, that we really try to raise these issues to a spiritual issue, not an economic issue, not a personal issue, not a political issue, not an ego issue. Not easy to do, but critically important. And I'll talk about that some more later when we get to white folks' roles. And I think this is the last one in terms of our foundational information. So we're told that all of this can only be achieved through love. So if somebody could please read that.
Ultimately, the power to transform the world is affected by love. Love originating from the relationship with the divine. Love ablaze among members of a community. Love extended without restriction to every human being. This divine love, ignited by the Word of God, is disseminated by enkindled souls through intimate conversations that create new susceptibilities in human hearts. open minds to moral persuasion, and loosen the hold of biased norms and social systems so that they can gradually take on a new form in keeping with the requirements of humanity's age of maturity. You are channels for this divine love. Let it flow through you to all who cross your path. Infuse it into every neighborhood and social space in which you move to build capacity to canalize the society building power of Baha'u'llah's revelation. There can be no result until the destined outcome is achieved. Universal House of Justice, July 22nd, 2020.
Thank you very much. So again, this is really, really deep. And I love the part where it talks about divine love, ignited by the word of God, is disseminated by enkindled souls through intimate conversations. And I'll just relate that. I know some of you weren't on at the beginning, but I talked a little bit about a wonderful devotional gathering that has been held by the Baha'is in Tampa on every Friday night for the last 19 weeks. And I think Afsane is on this call. She and I moderate that conversation. And I can tell you that that's what has been happening in that call. And I find that whenever we create a space to bring Black folks and white folks together to talk about this issue, incredible love results. And it results out of going through some hardship and some difficult conversations and hearing a lot of pain, particularly from our Black brothers and sisters. But it's been a really magical and intoxicating experience for all of us. We literally, we start at 7:30, and the last people that leave the call leave at about midnight every week. And at 11 o'clock, we still usually have like 25 people on the call. And that's only because it is feeding people's soul, right? And it's really a powerful thing. And that's ultimately the only way we're going to solve this issue. It's not through debates, it's not through politics, it's through souls connecting. So anyway, very powerful passage. All right, so let's get on to now we've set the foundation. Hopefully everybody on this call, I'm sure you already did, but understands how important this issue is, why it's important, what our focus needs to be, what we're trying to attain, what our aspiration is. So what is the role of white people? So first, I just a little background here. Who is white? I mean, I actually think this is a good question. We always talk in terms of white and Black. Some people don't necessarily fit neatly into that category. But what I would suggest to you is if your skin color is not so dark that people assume that you're Black, and if you've been in this country long enough to have been socialized into the ideas of white supremacy, then you're pretty much white as it pertains to this conversation. And I have a wife who's Indian, who came here in 1980 with her parents, and I know lots of immigrants from different countries who because of their skin color were able to sort of blend in. And while many of them may face discrimination on other bases, maybe religion or nationality or those sorts of things, our society very quickly indoctrinates folks from other countries who are not Black into our ideas of white supremacy. So I would suggest that this would apply to folks who fall into that category just as much as it applies to someone like me, whose background is completely European American, who was born here, and had all the privileges that go along with that. So we'll just, for what that's worth, I just wanted to address that first. Now, I wanted to address white folks' roles in two different ways. First, what is our role towards Black folks, our Black family and friends, and then what is our role towards other white folks? And I'm going to spend more time on the first topic because I think they're both really important, but probably spend a little more time on the first one. So what's our role towards Black folks? And for this, the starting point, and I think the end point, is a passage that I'm sure all the Baha'is on this call know, and probably a lot of the people that are not, know as well from The Guardian, again, from Shoghi Effendi from 1938, that I feel he pretty much tells white folks what they need to do with respect to the way we reach out to and the attitude we have towards our Black brothers and sisters in order to overcome this racial divide. So if somebody could read that, and then we are going to break this down in detail and talk about some things that it might mean. Okay.
Let the white make a supreme. Just lost it.
Sue, you're reading?
I just lost it. So
Uh-oh.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Somebody else want to read it? I'll read it. I can read it. That's fine.
Let George read.
I'll go ahead.
George read.
Oh,
Let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, to abandon once and for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. Shoghi Effendi, Advent of Divine Justice, 1938.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, so let's break this down. But before we do, just 2 points I wanted to make. Number one, we're not immune as Baha'is. Just because we're Baha'is doesn't mean we have some magic pill, and that white folks do not have the same biases and stereotypes and assumptions about Black people that the rest of society has, because this is where we grew up. So we don't have a magic pill. If we did, Shoghi Effendi would not be telling us that we need to do these things. The other thing I think is really important, and we've discussed this a lot on our Friday night call, is that that this passage is followed by a passage where he tells Black folks what they need to do. But I think it's important that the Guardian was very intentional about telling white folks what they needed to do first, because I really think that until white folks play their role, it's impossible or really difficult for Black folks to step into their role. And in the response where the Guardian tells Black folks what they need to do, he specifically uses the word response. So it's like they are responding to a step that has already been taken by white folks. So I think for whites, and I've heard this before, I've heard white Baha'is or just white people in general try to pass it off and say, well, Black folks aren't doing what they're supposed to do. My response is, well, we got to take the first step. Don't worry about them. Take care of your own house first. When your own house is in order, let them worry about what they've got to do. So I think that's a vitally, vitally important point. We are not waiting as white folks for anyone. We have to take the first step. So let's break this down a bit. Number one, to abandon once for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority. I assume a lot of you have heard the term implicit bias, and there's been a lot of study. There's this great institute at Ohio State University called the Kirwan Institute, and there's a quote from them below discussing what implicit bias is. And I see that I'm taking longer to talk than normal than I expected to. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'll just summarize real quickly. But basically, the Guardian was really talking about implicit bias probably before that was even a term, and this telling folks to give up their inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority is really telling them to check and understand that they have implicit bias. And implicit bias, as it says below, refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. And I'll just stop at that. But in short, it just means that white people in this country, we have a lot of unfavorable impressions of Black folks that we're not even conscious of, and it's scary. And if you go to this Kirwan Institute, they have tests that you can take, and I've taken them, and you'd be shocked. You might think you don't have these biases, but you do. And to get over these biases, it takes intentional effort, it takes awareness, it takes acknowledgement, and then it takes a lot of work. So let's go to the next slide. So I say here, just, it takes study. You've got to study history. You've got to understand how we got to where we got to, because that'll help break down a lot of the things that you have been told, which are not true about Black folks. Then we need to listen and learn from our Black friends, because the greatest way to, and they've done studies, the best way to break down implicit bias or that subconscious sense of superiority is through alternate experiences which challenge those ideas that are in our subconscious. And the more of those experiences we have, when we actually step out and form genuine friendships with Black folks, which we'll get to in a second, and see that Black folks are not all these horrible things we've been told that they are, little by little, our unconscious response may dissipate over time. And this all takes an attitude of humility and the ability to look at ourselves. This doesn't make us bad people. It just makes us, we're just part of this society. We're subject to this disease like everyone else. We didn't choose to be white, but we were born white in America. And all of these things were fed into us from a very, very, very young age. And then I just put here, the Guardian is really calling us to action. He's telling us to abandon this inherent subconscious sense of superiority. Not just like try to do better, but get rid of it. I mean, that's a high bar. So I thought that was these words that the Guardian chose his words very carefully. So I think it's important to look at that. Number two, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race. Now, I think that this relates, somewhat to the first. But the first one is more of an attitude. Like we just kind of have this, not an attitude. It's a subconscious belief that we have that we're superior. This is more an attitude, and it comes out of this idea that when you're white in this country, you are used to being listened to and not spoken to. We're used to having all the answers. So I can tell you in terms of my history, I grew up with, again, getting back to the not being immune, I grew up in a very diverse Baha'i community in Atlanta, very racially mixed. I went to a very integrated public school as a result of forced busing, which was literally half and half, African-American and white. Then we moved to North Carolina, and my 6th to 10th grade years, I went to a school where I was the minority. It was 80% African-American. I've then had opportunities to work on issues of racial justice. I've been around Black folks my whole life. I've lived in Black neighborhoods. The only thing I didn't do is I didn't marry a Black woman. I married an Indian woman. But what I'm trying to tell you is I had every advantage. I had every opportunity that you would think that I would be able to abandon that implicit bias, that subconscious sense of superiority. But a few years ago, while our family was living in India, I had some conversations on Facebook, which when I now look back, and they were on race, when I now look back, I realized that when Black folks would say something about racism that was experienced, usually by somebody else, a Black man being shot on tape, my first reaction was to correct them, was to tell them why they were wrong, and feel like I needed to educate them, that they were just simply being too emotional. And I realized I was talking down to them. And these are people I really love and I'd known for a long time. And it was really, really, really painful to come to this realization. And it happened more than once, and it was humbling, to say the least. But it's something that, so it was the definition of patronizing. And so what I'm just trying to say is that it's within us, and I still have to check that. I mean, now I see somebody post something, and I've sort of coached myself out of that first response being, let me talk down to them. I stop, I think, and I Instead, I think, my God, the pain that this person is feeling and the way this is affecting them, now this is real, and I validate. You just validate. When somebody has an emotion, somebody has pain, you don't think about whether, just validate it, you know. And it took me a lot of practice, and it's still something I have to work on because this runs really deep. All right, moving on. This is real.
Regina Colson has a question regarding the
Sure.
language that we use. Regina, could you please ask your question?
Yes, Steve, thank you for a provocative presentation. The Baha'i Faith is going to transform humanity. Since words have spiritual power, should we not consider teaching the spiritual solution to racism by using Baha'i words of the Baha'i language? The example I can use is when people don't know how to express an issue or problem, sometimes they don't have the language. Like people having relatives in prison, but they don't want to talk about it because they're embarrassed. The Baha'i Faith words have a lot of power, and as I read the writings and the prayers, I'm looking at the construction of the sentences and the words that are used. I'm not a linguist, but it has a power to it. Should we not consider this new Baha'i language as we solve the problem?
I think that's a great question, Regina. I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think the answer is absolutely. I think that the guidance that we talked about at the beginning basically tells us to do that. I mean, it tells us to elevate the conversation, and to me, it means to change the language. And we talked about this yesterday in our elevated conversation workshop. We need to get away from the language that contemporary society uses. I mean, some of it is helpful. Maybe we don't completely discard it, but I think we do try to substitute a new language, which, yes, is encompassed within our writings, in order to, because what we're really looking for, Regina, I think we would all agree, is we need a complete shift in thinking, a paradigm shift, in order to bring about a new world order, which is what Baha'is are trying to do. And that's only going to happen, and words are important. That's only going to happen if we change the way we talk. I absolutely 100% agree with you. And I think as I come to my part about what our role is towards white people, that was something that I was going to address, and it's something that I know I try to do, sometimes very unsuccessfully, in my conversations with challenging white people. So yeah, thank you very much for bringing that up. I hope I answered your question. I think you answered the question through the question, so no question.
You answered it.
No answer required. Thank you.
You answered it beautifully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks for being on the call. All right, so number 3, yeah, this is real work, is to persuade them. So that's persuade Black folks through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions. And I just define these terms. I mean, this is filled with great terms. Intimate, which means closely acquainted, familiar, close. Okay, so this isn't just, this isn't just your person you know at work or person you play tennis with. This is somebody who you're really close to, right? Spontaneous, having an open, natural, and uninhibited manner. So I think we as white folks have to get to the point where we are just naturally loving our Black friends the way we would anyone else, right? Color shouldn't matter. If anything, we should love them more, right? Because we know that there hasn't been enough of that in the past. We need to really make this effort, and to a point where it just becomes natural, spontaneous, right? And then informal, having a relaxed, friendly, or unofficial style, manner, or nature. So I think what the Guardian's getting at here is this should just be something that's free-flowing and easy and natural, right? And again, I keep coming back to our Friday night call, and if you haven't been on it, God, I really invite you to come on. We have seen this happen. I know Afsane's on this call. We have seen these connections between Black folks and white folks happen. And it's because the white folks on that call want that love. They want to love on their black friends, and their black friends in response are going to love them. And it's a beautiful thing, but it's got to be real. Another word that that was my word, genuine, sincere. Okay, so this cannot be something fake. And I think for it not to be fake, it takes that work for the white folks to work on those first two things, get rid of that subconscious sense of superiority and stop patronizing and just be humble. And if anything, we're the ones that need to learn, right? I mean, racism, who do you learn racism from? You learn it from the people who have suffered from it. I have never, ever suffered from racism. So who am I to speak down to folks and tell them what racism is about? I need to be learning in a very humble posture. All right, and the last part of that passage, to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of the people who have received for so long a period such a grievous and slow healing wounds. So again, we're coming back to this idea of white fragility, which I think is one of those concepts that is very helpful from contemporary learning. It also can be a concept that maybe you don't want to throw out there right away to a white person who's a little sensitive about these issues. Maybe you don't right away tell them they have white fragility or tell them they have white privilege. Maybe you have to move them along a little bit. But it is real. White people want to run from these conversations very quickly. And I just think it takes incredible patience. I mean, the way I think of it is that Black folks have been in the trenches for 401 years in this country and have had to be the victims of just the unspeakable cruelty and murder and rape and just breaking up of families and destroying of generations of people. The least we can do as white folks is to get in the trenches with them. If anything, we should be out ahead right now and saying, you know what, we got you, we got your back. We're gonna take care of this, and I don't care what I have to face. And even if you don't trust me right away, and you come back at me, I'm gonna stay in this fight. And just I had a really painful thing happen to me 2 years ago, and big deal. I'm white, so I had something painful happen to me, but nonetheless, it was painful. I got into a debate with some friends on Facebook about an issue which was racially related. I won't go into detail. And I was being a little, patronizing and doing the same old white thing. And it was humbling. And I had a dear Baha'i friend of mine. And she was Persian Baha'i. She actually told me, she said, you know what, they're being a little harsh with you. They're coming at you a little hard. It's probably a little unfair, but suck it up. It's okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to survive this thing. And she gave me a great analogy to what I was going through, to what Baha'u'llah went through. But I don't even want to cite that because I'm certainly not the manifestation of God. But, it was a story that he received indignities which were completely undeserved. But he chose to receive them because it made that other person feel better. So she said, you know what? If they need to vent, and you have to be on the receiving end of it, so what? Maybe they are wrong, but you know what? This is coming from a place of pain. You've said things that have hurt them, and maybe their response isn't perfect. But if you're going to be in this game, you got to stay in this game. So it comes back to that beset with pitfalls. So just to review, excuse me, the Guardian calls us to change our attitudes and to act. So those words are important. He told us to abandon, just get rid of the sense of superiority, correct our tendency. He didn't say, try to correct. He said correct, persuade. So he's putting the onus on us. We have to persuade our Black friends that we're being real and that we really want to be their friends and that they can trust us. And at the same time, if they don't respond right away and they're a little suspicious, because God knows they've got a lot of reason to be suspicious of white folks, Baha'i or not Baha'i, we've got to be patient. We owe that to our Black brothers and sisters to be patient, okay? And the last thing I wanted to say on this, and I think it's an important point, is that Baha'u'llah once compared the colored people to the black pupil of the eye surrounded by the white. In this, the black pupil is seen the reflection of that which is before it, and through it the light of the Spirit shineth forth. So, and, you know, I just looked up what the role of the pupil of the eye is, and if the pupil of the eye does not allow light to come in, then we're blind. So I think this is so powerful. I think a lot of white folks, including me, don't really understand how the spiritual power of African Americans in this country because of the indignities that have been endured. And I think that once we as whites get to a point where we not only listen to the Black folks in our communities, but we actually put them in the place of honor, like Abdu'l-Baha did with Louis Gregory when he came here, and learn from them, and show them the level of respect that they deserve, that, you know, and understand this whole people that I come, and be, I put here, be willing to accept a new reality. We you know, white folks are very hesitant to give up our position in our society and to share our power, and to really accept the idea of multiculturalism. And one of the foremost writers on race right now, Ibram Kendi, talks about that. You know, I heard him say, if we're really a multicultural society, we really have to be, if we really are, we have to really be willing to do that. We have to really be willing to honor other people and what they bring to the table, and not want them just to be more like, you know, the white majority. And that's what we've always done, and it runs deep, but particularly when it comes to Black folks. And that's why, again, this Friday, I keep bringing back this Friday night call, but we have some really powerful Black folks on that call. I mean, they're all powerful, but some folks with some incredible wisdom who have been through so much. And if you see the respect and the honor that white people give them on this call, it's like turning the world upside down. It's like giving to them the way white people have always been treated. And I think that we have to do that in order to get to the place that we need to get to. So it's getting late. I don't know that I really want to, John, are there questions? Because I can talk about our role towards other white folks, but I don't want to just keep on talking. I really want this to be more of a conversation.
So there is a question.
Yeah.
There are two questions, actually.
Okay.
First question from St. Pete. It's over time, so I'm just going to read off parts of it so you get the idea. The question is about how do we bring this awareness that needs to be made, where there is the apathy, the patronizing attitudes, the sense of superiority, this prejudice. A person who is afflicted with the mentality that they are better than others don't always realize that they are this way. So how do you bring awareness that racism is real to people who are in denial about it? And more importantly, where the stereotypes of Black people is front and center, to the people that we're speaking to, where it is the reality of the person we're speaking to.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And my short answer is, I don't know. The longer answer to that is, I'm trying to figure it out, like I think all white folks are. And when we're having challenging conversations with other folks, what I would say, and again, I've had more conversations about race with white folks in the last 6 months than I've had in my entire life before that. So this is very much a learning process for me. Two things. Number one, I would say that anybody, if you're having the conversation, have it for a while. Now, I think at some point you might find that some people are just trying to drive their agenda. They just want to sell you their narrative, and they're not listening at all. And I would say, you know, give them some time, listen to it, present alternative viewpoints, try to take it away. And this is when I say, talking about other white folks, this is getting into that. Take it away from that political realm. Try to present something totally different, right? Try to talk about feelings of your Black friends. Try to take it away from this like ego battle, this argument between your viewpoint and their viewpoint, but rather try to bring it into a very human level. But if at some point it's not going anywhere, then we have limited time. I would just move on, maybe agree to disagree, and know that you've laid some breadcrumbs, right? You don't know that what you've said today might not affect people later on. I know as a white guy who happens to be a trial lawyer, like I want to convince people right away. That's like that's my default, is I want to win the argument. And that is not going to work with folks like this. Now, you know, you got to know they're in a place and they need to be fed information very, very slowly. And you have to be very intentional about it. You can't throw words at them that you know are going to turn them off. You know, you can't tell them you have white privilege. You can't tell them they're racist. You can't use words like that. It's not going to work. But what you have to do is try to get this onto that spiritual level. Try to elevate the conversation. Try to change. I don't mean change the subject. We're still talking about race, but try to change the try to change the perspective to one of more of, hey, this is a human issue. This is not an economic issue.
I found a quote that I think is very valuable to share right now.
Sure.
The quote is from the Justice, the supreme body for the Baha'is of the world. And the quote, that one of the paragraphs, it's so beautiful on the subject. It says, "Racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. It deprives a portion of humanity of the opportunity to cultivate and express the full range of their capability and to live a meaningful and flourishing life, while blighting the progress of the rest of humankind. It cannot be rooted out by contest and conflict." Now, we established that, I think, very much. It must be supplanted. I think supplanted means replaced, the definition, right? It must be supplanted by the establishment of just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift all and will not designate anyone as other. Other, that's a very interesting concept. The change required is not merely social and economic, but above all, moral and spiritual. Within the context of the framework governing your activities, it is necessary to carefully examine the forces unfolding around you to determine where your energies might reinforce the most promising initiatives, what you should avoid, and how you might lend a distinctive contribution. It is not possible for you to effect the transformation envisioned by Baha'u'llah merely by adopting the perspectives, practices, concepts, criticisms, and language of contemporary society. Your approach instead will be distinguished by maintaining a humble posture of learning, weighing alternatives in light of his teachings, consulting to harmonize differing views and shape collective action, and marching forward with unbreakable unity in serried lines. The point that stuck out extremely here to me personally, in my own opinion, in my humble opinion, that is, it is necessary to carefully examine the forces unfolding around you to determine where your energies might reinforce the most promising initiatives. And that it's not possible to effect the transformation envisioned by Baha'u'llah merely by adopting the perspectives, the practices, the concepts, the criticisms, and language of contemporary society. And I feel it echoes a lot what Regina Colston was asking earlier about the language we use, the words we use, and the way we say it. And further, our approach, the House of Justice says, it's distinguished by maintaining a humble posture of learning. So I see humility, but I also see learning in the same phrase. So clearly we're learning together. And it's not obviously someone just saying what they think and putting it out there. I think there's an active process where we're working together to get somewhere, right?
Yeah, and if I could just give an example of having seen that work in action, and again, I'm going back to our Friday night call. I've had I've had 3 different people, white men, who I had conversations with during the week, and this was whatever random week it was, who had both thought about the race issue, had not had a lot of conversations about it, but were intrigued or were frustrated by things going on in society. And I invited them to our Friday night call, and all 3 of them have been, 2 of them have never kind of went away. They've stayed on this call. And each one of them, because I got them on this call, they were able to hear above the noise, because there's no politics on our call. It's just all heart to heart, it's just human beings. So they were able to hear an elevated conversation. And then more importantly, they were able to hear, and they all said it was the first time in their lives they'd ever heard this. They were able to hear from Black folks the reality of their lives and how racism has affected them, through vignettes, through stories, and then through kind of a broader perspective of how it's affected their life. And so what I would say, going back to that question, is try to find folks like that, because once you get them, these three guys have been changed forever. I mean, forever. And how is what they've taken from these conversations, how is that going to affect the way they talk to other white people? It's like we're creating ripples in the pond. And so it really is worth it. I mean, you may hear a lot of the language and think, oh, it's never going to happen. But my God, white people are buying books on racism right now. They're attending book clubs. I mean, they're doing things we've never seen white folks do. So this is the time. And I think it's the people that are ripe, get it beyond the one-on-one thing, get them into a safe place where they can hear Black voices. Because most white folks they've never heard white people share this stuff. And it's life-changing when they hear it. So what was the next question?
So we had a question from George Vaya, and also a friend from St. Petersburg, which is in the same vein about how we bring this awareness in our legal system. Also, yourself being an attorney and having more experience with legal system, it's been in front of you, what you've been witnessing. George, are you able to speak? If not, I can ask your question for you. Okay, unless he unmutes, I'm gonna read the question.
Okay.
So the question he asked is that he's been floating the idea of a class action lawsuit against local people in government and the police and state attorney's office for specifically targeting Black communities for traffic tickets and arrests, people who abuse their power. And because he was working with the public defender's office, he has a little more experience and knowledge of those occurrences. So he is asking about what you think about doing initiatives of this type to solve the problem of racism.
And John, if I may, the second angle is that we really need to engage Whitey in this conversation, because face it, Whitey's been in control for 500 years in America and for 5,000 years across human history.
Right.
And until we change the hearts of the people who control everything, make them aware, this is wrong. This is satanic. This is evil. You claim to do it in the name of Jesus, and you do it in the name of Judas. And that sort of thing, and just to wake them up,
yep,
and to engage them and say, look, come on, let's stop doing it.
Yeah, no, I think I love the question. Obviously, overcoming institutional systemic racism is something that's going to require us to do all sorts of things on a societal and institutional level. What I would say is that, and there's a lot of great stuff that's been done over the years, ongoing, clearly. What I would say is that, going back to this presentation, we're told it's a spiritual solution, and all these writings talk about the importance of love and bringing hearts together. And what I'm hopeful of is that, again, all these white folks going out and buying books and being in book clubs and whatever, and hopefully they have some stamina, right? We just don't know. A lot of them are probably going to put these books aside, having not read them, and until the next crisis comes along, they'll forget about it. But hopefully not. We're in a pandemic. We're still kind of shut down in a lot of ways. So hopefully their attention span's a little bit longer, and politicians are actually talking about it, which is great. But I think we need to get to a critical mass, right? And I see us getting closer. And I think once we get to a critical mass, And the fact that this is one of the two big issues in the presidential campaign right now, the pandemic and racial justice, that's huge. I mean, it used to be one question in a debate and that was it. It was kind of a throwaway, right? And everybody said the right thing and that was it. I think if we get to a critical mass, then these institutional changes will happen. But it's only going to happen once hearts connect, people understand that, hey, this is really a serious issue. And you're right, it's white people. I mean, Black folks are not going to change the institutions on their own without us being in the lead, because we're the majority. We control the institutions. It's a reality. And but if we get a critical mass of white people who actually demand of the lawmakers to sit down, bring the best minds without politics involved, hard to do, and just sit down and say, let's bring in the experts. Let's look at the statistics. Let's bring people from the community in. Let's talk about what the real issues are. And let's figure out ways, anti-racist solutions to change things so that these things don't happen anymore. At the same time, yeah, class actions, things to hold the system accountable for what it's already done. Absolutely. But ultimately, the only way this is going to change is once we change enough white people's hearts where there's a critical mass that people then demand, treat this as an issue that must be dealt with. I was talking to somebody the other day who's not a Baha'i, and I said, listen, I'm not political, I'm not Democrat, I'm not Republican. I vote based on the qualifications of the individual. And in my mind, it's always been two things. It's always been their character. And then number two, what, if anything, are they going to do about the race situation? Because I believe it's the most vital and challenging issue. That's what I'm looking at. If they have crappy character, I don't care what they're going to do on the race issue. I may not vote for them. But if they have a decent character and they're actually think they're going to do, and this is not just national, because the people who really have an effect on these policies are on the local and state level. So I would say, study the people on the ballot this year, like really study and see what they've said about race. Are they really going to try to impact the way police departments do things? Are they going to try to change the way we fund schools? Are they going to try to, change the mental health resources available in Black communities? I mean, what are they going to do about all these things that negatively impact the Black community? And if they're kind of silent on that and the other person actually isn't, who cares what party they are? Vote for them, I mean, that's my own personal thought.
So there is a question
Yep.
that is relating to what has been discussed with the previous questions as well. And this person from Clearwater has asked about the discrimination against, of course, Black people. It's also a larger problem in the judicial system. His statement and his question, he's stating that prosecutors have immunity and only rich people can defend themselves versus the majority that they do not have the means of getting justice. And they have to endure that injustice because if they try, which they're unable to financially, they'll go bankrupt. Even if they are innocent, they'll go bankrupt. And obviously, the people on the other side of the racial divide where they have been systematically treated wrongly, they have more interactions with the law because of what we've discussed already. And they get more discriminated against because they're sitting ducks. They don't have the ability to financially sustain a fight for their innocence. So what is your thought on this subject where the discrimination isn't just now about color, it's about class, it's about your financial status, it's about where you are and how much you can spend. And of course, the immunity of the people who are prosecuting, the prosecutors. A prosecutor can come in and prosecute potentially very unethically and get away with it because the poor guy who wants to call, they want to say something happened to me, I didn't do anything, this person took advantage of their position. And it could have been easily an oversight of the prosecutor even. It could not be a willful thing. It could be just negligence that causes an innocent person to go through so much injustice. So I don't really think it's even a matter of anything willful per se. It's these things that we were talking about today that we don't realize could be there, that patronizing attitude, because someone's on the other end, they're powerless, they're on the other end of your stick. You don't think about the end of the stick that's going to be whacking them effectively with maybe life in prison, and they didn't even deserve a day.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, the problems run deep. I mean, we clearly need a fundamental and complete overhaul of our judicial system. It is based on I'm a civil lawyer, I'm not a criminal lawyer, but obviously I know a bit about criminal law and the way things are set up and studied these things some. There's no doubt it's an advantage to have money. It's no doubt it's an advantage to be white. And so when you're black and you're poor, the system is going to screw you. That's just the way it is. You're not going to be able to hire an attorney. The system, because we have so effectively defined black men as criminals before they've even gone to court, it has affected our policies. And when I say it's affected our policies, we have a lot of budget for the DAs, the district attorney. We have very few funds for public defenders. So little that the only lawyers who are willing to take the money to defend somebody are lawyers right out of law school who don't know what the hell they're doing. Excuse my language. And so it becomes even more unfair. It's stacked even more against folks that have no money. So what do we do about it? I hate to keep coming back to this, but this isn't going to change until we change people's hearts, until people. Was I muted?
Yeah, I apologize, Steve. I went to admit someone and someone else already. It was a technical oversight. Please continue.
You guys can hear me now?
Yes.
But yeah, it's not going to change until a critical mass and insist that the people in power, who have to listen to them, who have to be accountable to them, recognize these issues, and then you have to have the best legal minds who work in these areas sit down, understand the inequities, and figure out a way that everybody can get a fair shake. I mean, the problem with, our problem in society, and I know that Advent of Divine Justice, the Guardian talks a lot about materialism. Everything's about money in our society, Money is an advantage to getting elected. So these are our leaders, right? The more money you have, the better. Money is an advantage to not getting put in jail. I mean, money is an advantage to making money, getting ahead, not getting ahead. And so a part of it is, it comes back to that spiritual foundation. Our morals are out of whack. Our love of money and materialism, and the idea that most people think it's okay. I mean, these things we're talking about, well, if he's got the money to defend himself, God bless him, So yeah, O.J. Simpson gets off. Some other poor, black schmuck that gets accused of murder, and there's a 1 in 5 billion chance it wasn't his DNA, is going to get convicted every single time, right? That's the way the system's set up, and people act like that's okay. And I think people just have to be challenged in a way where it becomes a very personal thing. And here's some of these stories. I presented a bunch of statistics yesterday talking about how the war on drugs has inordinately affected the black community. I'm sure all of you guys know this, but I mean, whites actually use drugs at a higher rate than blacks, but black folks get imprisoned at like 6 times the amount. They get convicted at much higher rates. They get much longer sentences. This just isn't right. So it's that implicit bias again. It's built in. The judges see a black defendant. They see a criminal. They see a white defendant. They might see a kid who, he had a bad day. Give him a chance. Happens all the time. I have 2 nephews. One's black and one's white. I was telling my mother this yesterday. I said, it's sad, but my black nephew, who's right now only 7, 8 years old, he's not going to be able to make a mistake. If he makes a mistake, he's going to get labeled. My white nephew, he's a good kid. He's in his 20s now, never got into trouble. But if he had gotten into trouble, everybody would have been like, boys will be boys. Yeah, so he bashed a mailbox. So he hit somebody who was driving drunk when he was 16. That's what boys do, right? The black person, he's a criminal. So this just runs really, really, really deep. So now I don't have the answer to that question, how it's going to happen. I just know it's only going to happen when people are motivated to make it happen, and really smart people sit down. And without politics being an issue, and without money being an issue, say, how do we set up a system so that everybody has the same right to defend themselves when they are.
It actually seems like there is a solution, though. the Baha'i writings where we talk about materialism a lot. Where, of course, the source of all these problems where, have and have not, it comes down to the materialism. People like us, like I myself, I'm an attorney as well. You're an attorney, but there's a lot of attorneys out there. People like us in this context, we can make a difference. But it's not just people like us, but people who have the idea, that beautiful idea that's planted in their mind that grows into something more. The fact that the Baha'i Faith tells us that the spiritual solution is available to all of our economic problems. The fact that the Baha'i Faith tells us that we are all created not just equal, but we have to recognize our prejudices and eliminate them, obviously, where they are infracting other people's freedoms. The fact that as Baha'is, we're told, more importantly, to serve, to work in the spirit of service. These things are just a few of those paradigm-changing thoughts that when the people who are running the system, they become enamored, they become touched by, they adopt even a little bit, a scintilla of adoption of the Baha'i values and the Baha'i spirit. If they just adopt that in their own life, in their own actions, there is a very large chance, I believe, that we can genuinely make that change. So I think the solution, it's not only addressing, yes, there's structural problems, but those structural problems are symptomatic of a deeper problem, which is spiritual, which is the fact that within the mind, people already have these prejudices, they can't do something. Within the mind and the heart, they already don't have that love. So then when someone comes around with an idea, oh, a change is possible and here's how you get it done, and it's logically very sound, already you're dead at the door right from the start because they don't believe that it's possible. They say, oh, it's utopic. Oh, it'd be great if that happened, but it's not going to be me. So people agree with it, but the spirit of faith, the fire of hope that we hold on to here in this meeting, I feel when we come in contact with somebody who's not at this meeting today, if we have that fire of hope and we are just, again, maintaining our fire within ourselves, I feel it will spread to that person who comes into contact with us, who really, really, really is in a better position to make more use of that fire than we have. That's just my idea.
No, and it's important, and I know our Baha'i writings tell us, and I'm horribly paraphrasing, that none of these things that we're trying to change are going to change unless our inner lives and the way we live our life reflects those principles that we're trying to teach. So if you're a hypocrite, it's not going to happen. So if you tell somebody, hey, we shouldn't gossip, but then you're talking about your coworker down the hall every day, then no one's going to listen to you, right? So ultimately, that's really important. I mean, we have to internalize these teachings and live them in our everyday life. And ultimately, when we do, we're an example. Just the language we use when for example, like Baha'is don't drink, right? We're not supposed to drink. And I have had so many occasions in my life where, I've had people tell me, oh, how do you not drink? There's so much pressure, whatever. Or don't people put pressure on you? And I'm like, no. I said, every time I've been in a situation and people are wondering why I'm not drinking, and I tell them, to a person, they're always like, wow, that's interesting. I really respect that. I've never gotten blowback for that. And if I did, I wouldn't care. But people notice when you're different, and it's so important for us to try to distinguish ourselves. And if we want people's hearts to change, we have to be the change we're looking for, right? Isn't that a quote from somewhere?
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you, I didn't get through my whole PowerPoint, but the last few things were just, I kind of went through them real quick, just in terms of what we should do towards white people. But it's kind of common sense, and we've covered on most of it. And I took it down because I wanted to see everybody's face, although very few people are actually showing their face.
Well, they had them up. Please, people who've had their faces shown, please.
I love seeing people's faces on these conversations. Whenever I don't see a face, I'm always suspicious whether they're really there or whether they're, somewhere else. So, anyway.
Of course.
Hey, Regina. I'm glad I get to see you. I heard your beautiful voice. Now I get to see the face. Where are you from?
Huntsville, Alabama.
Oh, cool. Oh, not everybody's from Florida here. Okay, cool.
Exactly.
My mom said she was watching me on YouTube, so.
Well, it's a provocative discussion,
Yeah.
And uniquely needed.
No doubt about it.
And by the way, we have viewers on YouTube and Facebook who are literally right now watching from other countries. We have a friend from Norway, Alex. We have friends from around the world. Alex actually has a question, which, Alex, we want to get to. Just be patient. There's just a list of them at the moment, too. We have Michael O'Shea, if I'm saying his last name correctly. He's asking, if it is our nature to form unconscious prejudices, are we as Baha'is endeavoring to change an aspect of our human nature more so than the perception that people have?
I wouldn't say it's in our human nature. I just think that when it's our brains work in a particular way where if we are fed certain information over and over and over again, it becomes part of our unconscious reality, which is really part of our reptilian brain, right? It's our unconscious. And so what we can do is, if we recognize that that's happening, because we're human, right? Because we're human, unlike animals, we don't have to be a slave to that instinctual response. You know, we can actually study it out of us. We can actually use our, there's this great book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, and it talks about our two systems of brains, you know, the unconscious, it's called system 1 and system 2, and how often those, you know, in a perfect world, those systems work together. Often they don't, and we have a lot of illogical responses to things. And our response to race and implicit bias is really a dysfunctioning of system 1 and 2 not working together, because system 1 believes that Black people are a threat, right? And they're really not a threat, but we've been taught to be told they're a threat because of the way they're portrayed on, you know, local news, and you see a murder in the Black community and the way Black men are talked about, and even the language we use, like, oh, you know, I know when a white person says to me, oh, we needed to move out of that community because the schools weren't good, I know right away that it's Black kids in that school. I know that, right? That's in their mind. That's like fed into us, and we have to intentionally study so we can. So no, it's not part of human nature. It's just part of the way our brain works, and our brain doesn't work perfectly. But because we have a brain and we can study and we can think through these things, we can train our minds to think in a different way, so that maybe it's no longer habitual, right? And hopefully we've all done that to a point where we don't automatically see a Black person and think criminal, or Black man in particular. But most of us probably still do. I mean, do I still fear a young Black kid more than I do a white kid? Absolutely. I'd be lying if I didn't say I did. But what I do is I see it and I tell myself right away, stop doing that. That's not right. You know, that's what we have to do, you know.
So there's a question actually from YouTube. We got a question from Alex on YouTube. He's asking, how might we scientifically argue a Baha'i-inspired approach to racial unity and social justice? I think that a really, really good statement I remember hearing from a scientist, and I know he's a figure amongst a lot of people of my generation, Bill Nye the Science Guy. He mentioned it very, very simply. We are all genetically identical except for a very, 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 like, very small, negligible portion of our DNA. We're practically genetically identical to every single living person on this planet. And the fact is, scientifically, we're all one. And what the role of the Baha'i message is to establish that within the hearts and minds. Just the reality that is so obvious, so consciously present in the hearts and minds of the scientists who have already found that. So if you have anything to add to that, I think that's a good answer.
Yeah, just real briefly, I started off my talk yesterday on race and poverty with the simple question, which is, if there are no biological differences, which have been proven, as you just so eloquently stated, then what is the reason that there are these vast differences in achievement in this country? And there's only two answers, and one has already been proven wrong by the question, because the one is that Black folks are somehow inferior. It's already been disproven because there's no biological difference. The only other explanation is racism, right? And it's really simple. And so I presented a bunch of statistics, and I'll share one with you guys, and you guys can have the PowerPoint I did yesterday, because I found some really cool graphs. But you know, a white family, a white family with no high school education has more family wealth than a Black family with graduate degrees. I mean, how does that happen? A Black mother with a graduate degree has a higher infant mortality rate than a white mother who doesn't have an 8th grade education. How do these things happen if there's not systemic issues? I mean, it's just, so that's a scientific way to argue it, you know, and I presented a bunch of those stats yesterday, and in every measure, Black folks are so far behind. You know, somebody said yesterday, they were reading a book. She said that it takes a Black family 8 generations to achieve the wealth that a white family achieves in 1 generation, right? And that 1 generation achieving wealth is the definition of the American dream, right? Now, how many immigrants would come to this country if you told them, hey, if you come to this country in only 8 generations, a mere 160 years, you too can have the American dream? People would stay in Cuba, they'd stay in Russia. They wouldn't come here. Why would they come here? But yet that's what is happening to Black folks, right? So this is all scientific, you know what I'm saying? But people aren't going to listen to scientific arguments unless they get past that first point where you get them out of their narrative and out of their worldview. They have to be willing to accept that, because otherwise they're going to spin statistics, they're going to argue something else. They're just going to try to muddy the water. And I've gotten into so many of those rabbit holes. And sometimes it's better just to, you know what, I've laid some breadcrumbs, leave them on their way, put them in God's hand, and let's move on to somebody else.
So question was posed, and it's actually very shocking. I'm not sure if you saw in the news about the Pizza Hut driver who almost ran over a few people when they were in the midst of protesting. Stuff like that, where you see these in the news, where you see people and the indifference. It's saddening, but the reason this question, it seems important, is because the question is being asked, what do we do about these times when clearly someone commits an act, and you see there's cancel culture among my generation has been a very big thing. You see cancel culture in general where this is happening. But as Baha'is, aside from the typical framework of shaming people and companies who don't condemn the actions of their employees when a wrong is committed, like Starbucks, there were homeless people that would not be allowed to use the Starbucks because they're homeless, and also African Americans were in one Starbucks turned away for very bad reasons, and it was just a very bad situation. But Starbucks, they as a company took charge. They did education of their employees, and now they don't bar people from using their bathroom, which was a commonplace action among Starbucks, where they would not allow certain people to use the bathroom. And it would often be people of color as well as people who are not. But the circumstance was not a very good circumstance. The point of me bringing this up is Starbucks took charge. They did something productive. They took action. But what do we do about people in companies who don't, as Baha'is, rather than the norm that we see with cancel culture, where they just do these boycotts? What do you consider a Baha'i way forward?
You know, it's funny. That's a good question. I think it's very individual. You know, I think that just because we're Baha'is and we believe we have a solution, we're also part of society, and we're supposed to fight for justice, right? And I think that there are things that, I mean, we have guidance, and the guidance tells us to participate with like-minded organizations, to advocate for social change, advocate for racial justice. but it tells us to be careful in the way that we do it and make sure that it's not with organizations that have, you know, outright political aims or might be part of these old world contemporary conversations that we're trying to avoid. So I think, you know, it's almost a case by case. I think we're trying to figure out how to do that. And I think different Baha'is I've seen are all over the place on that. Some are probably way too politically involved. Some folks are, I think, on the other end of the spectrum are like, oh, if I just sit home and read the writings and pray, everything's going to be okay. And I think, and for each person, it's going to be a little bit different, right? I mean, we're all a little bit different. Some people are okay with going out and being a part of the protest. Other people don't want to do that. And I don't think there's any right or wrong answer necessarily. I think it's just for each one of us to recognize, to read the writings, come to our own understanding, and then decide. Now, I do think it's important. I mean, you know, we have Baha'i institutions, and obviously our institutions have to be very careful about what they decide to do and not decide to do, and that's why they consult. And I know our community in Tampa has had some very vigorous conversations on letters that we want to write and whether it's appropriate or not appropriate, political, not political, whatever. But as individuals, I just think it's an individual decision, and I think it's important that we distinguish between things that we do as an individual as opposed to things that we do as a spokesperson for the faith. And most things are as an individual, unless you're doing, you know, an institution has asked you to approach someone. We don't want to muddy those waters, you know, but at the same time, like our friends and family, you know, people know we're Baha'is. So if we're on Facebook and we're talking bad about a political figure, it's gonna it can reflect poorly on the faith, and that's really super important, you know. And unfortunately, there's too much of that goes on. But you know, we're human, we're imperfect, and we're doing the best we can to get there.
In the Baha'i teachings, for everyone watching this, that is an excellent point. Abdul Baha says, and of course Baha'u'llah, that unless we have something good to say about our leaders, we shouldn't speak of them at all. So that's a very unique approach that as Baha'is we have to take to engaging in social action. That means we can't actually criticize our leaders. We cannot say this person is evil. We can't say this person is racist. We cannot approach people in that subject, in that sphere. And that's an extremely important Baha'i concept that we need to definitely show as we engage in action in these kinds of problems. So we can, rather than looking at the people as small as they are, because again, people are very small, we look at the big issue, the real issue, which is what's underlying the problem, what's the source. And I think that this has been a beautiful conversation. It is now 12:40. We've gone over in our time, but the point is, this was a conversation that needed to happen. It needed having. We really thank you again for showing your PowerPoint presentation and going over this with us, Steve.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Did I live up to Jamie's standard that she set last week?
It seems to me as you have. And if Jamie would like to speak up, feel free, Jamie.
I can't live up to Jamie's standard.
No, Steve, you were amazing. This was absolutely amazing.
No, I wasn't. No, I'm just joking with you.
That's so funny.
I wasn't fishing for compliments.
I'm along for
what we were sharing. Yes. She shared quite rightly with you. It was amazing. Thank you.
I love Jamie. Jamie, I've only gotten to know Jamie through our Friday night call, and we've never met in person, but I absolutely love her. So I just wanted to say hi to her. So that was my way of doing that.
I've learned so much. Yeah.
We all learn from each other. That's the beautiful thing about this process. The more of these calls that we're on, the more we learn. And it gives, I mean, every time I'm on one of these calls, it gives me something else that I can use to respond to someone, you know, because I learned so much from you guys, you know, so it's an exciting time that we're living in.
Yes, and these beautiful writings from the House of Justice that we have, the beautiful guidance that we've received, really it's something unique. It's something we can take from this meeting, definitely, and share with our communities and try to inculcate that within the wider community. And hopefully we can make a beautiful, beautiful impact. So thank you again, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.